Many times earlier today that they got more than enough perishable goods already. What we're hearing from the volunteer workers is save your perishable goods, give it in a week or a couple of weeks because we're going to be needing it for a long time, so certainly that would be a better time to do it. Here at St. Vincent's Hospital, Paula is one of the frontline hospitals. Of 552 patients or so have been treated here directly from this Tuesday tragedy. Only about 30 or so remain in the hospital today, so all the rest of those were either released right away or released subsequently since the tragedy. The doctors have been heroes. We certainly do have heroes behind those doors, and they have been taking outstanding care of the patients. Paula.
Let me ask you this, Doctor. I know the city's advising people to, to stay away. They appreciate their generosity. Are there still doctors there ready to go on duty who have come in from other hospitals and simply won't go away? Or do they feel now that there are only, over 24 or so folks there that their help simply is not needed?
What I've been hearing, I've been talking to the doctors, some of these doctors, my friends, Paula, here in New York, and what I've been hearing from them is that they were ready to stand by and expected thousands of patients. Certainly they didn't get the call for that number of patients. They are still waiting, taking shifts, trying to rotate duties so that no one becomes overexhausted, and they're still standing ready in case more patients may show up. So there's certainly a optimism that I still feel amongst the doctors, amongst the healthcare personnel, and certainly amongst everyone here at St. Vincent's Hospital.
All right, Doctor, thanks so much for that report. I don't know whether you can make this out in the shot behind me, but I think it needs to have some attention called to it. This is the first day from this vantage point that you can actually see buildings break out from behind that cloud of smoke that's been shrouding the city for the last 4 days. There still are tremendous fumes coming out of the crash sites. The rescue workers on duty there are still taking tremendous cautions, not only because of the quality of the air, but because of the danger they continue to face. There are a lot of unstable buildings that surround the perimeter of this area. We have been told that 100 buildings in all have been either partially destroyed or damaged in some way since these terrorist attacks. Just to give you a perspective on what that means in New York City, because we got an awful lot of big buildings here. A company that manages these buildings is now saying at least 20% of all of the office space in that part of New York City has been damaged in some way. The structural engineers that have been studying these buildings say there are some pretty big chunks out of them. There was great concern a 54-story tower was going to fall the other day, but thankfully it appears as though that structure has not been so degraded that is going to happen. But for all these folks you see toiling down there, some of them with their bare hands, some of them literally picking up debris and putting it into buckets to carry out. If you want to think about the magnitude of the work that is involved here, so far 13,000 tons of stuff has been removed from here. It is an extremely painstaking process, and Richard Roth, one of our own correspondents, is standing about 10 blocks from that area right now, and he can probably give us some more insights as to what these rescuers continue to face. What are you seeing from your location today?
Well, Paula, the large cloud of smoke is still present. It's back to a clear blue sky. Very similar conditions to that Tuesday when the passenger plane struck the World Trade Center towers. The workers continue to take rubble out by truck, dump truck. Those are kind of the major sounds you do hear from the distance. We're about 8 to 10 blocks north of the site, and you hear a large rumble, a crash of glass or something. And there's a big American flag that's now been put up on the American Express corporate building that at one point earlier in the week was deemed a little bit risky to rescue workers. President Bush, Paula, had noted earlier today that Americans should return to their everyday lives, but I think the big issue for many people will be the fear of flying, fear of security. With me right now is one passenger who was on one of the first planes to leave Oakland, California yesterday to head to the East Coast, Donald Kinsman, and what he went through and some of the other passengers, nothing actually happened, but what went on during the flight? Tell us the mood when you boarded and how the passengers looked and sounded.
we boarded the plane, it was incredibly somber. It seemed like everybody was fearful, quiet.
Flight attendant, though?
Flight attendants seemed nervous to me. Other pilots coming off other planes.
One was crying, though?
One of the flight attendants, I was told, was crying. I didn't see that.
And then about an hour before the plane got to New York, just describe what happened in the plane.
Well, a couple guys got up in the aisle. You know, they could have been Middle Eastern descent. They looked like, you know, they might have been. And I think people got a little antsy, including myself. Everybody was sort of looking and a little nervous. And all of a sudden, I noticed that there were a couple passengers up in front, up by the pilot's door, along with the JetBlue employees. They were all up close to the pilot's door, and everybody was sort of looking back and forth, trying to be calm, but you sensed that there was a tension and a nervousness.
JetBlue being one of America's newer airlines, one of your friends, one of the other passengers had told me that some of the huskier passengers stood up in the aisle as if to say, we're ready to take you on, should you indeed be somebody posing trouble.
I sort of interpreted it that way, yes, yeah. I mean, I think that's what was going on. I mean, yeah.
What did you see from your passenger jet as you approached Manhattan of the former World Trade Center site?
We flew right over the site. We flew right over it. We saw it. And the woman behind me started crying. It was a pretty emotional moment, I have to say.
And JetBlue is an airline which provides live telecasts of all news channels, so thus what happened on the flight?
We were watching the planes crashing into the towers probably 3 times. Finally, my wife sort of nudged me and made me turn it off. She said, I can't see this anymore, you know, so it was scary. It was scary. I didn't know if we'd get here. I mean, there was no reason why we wouldn't, but, you know, you were thinking that the whole time.
Okay. Donald Kinsman, thank you very much. You were with your wife on your honeymoon out there in California. You're transiting up to Buffalo later today. Some of the fear that no doubt many passengers will be undergoing in flights to come. Judy?
Yes, if yesterday, as we listened to these accounts of what happened over the last few days, the president, of course, along with all of us, has been following this closely. Yesterday, a day he came to New York City to tour the recovery efforts around the World Trade Center. Today, he's sending a very forceful signal. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Kelly Wallace, who was near Camp David, and Bob Franken, our national correspondent, who's at the Pentagon. Kelly, the president used words today in his radio address that at any other time would be alarming to us, but I think we take them in stride given what's happened.
Absolutely. A number of very significant messages coming from the president, who, as you noted, is spending the weekend at the presidential retreat at Camp David, going over what he says will be a comprehensive assault against terrorism, one that will include political, economic, and quite possibly military options. Mr. Bush doing a number of things today. He's telling the American people that this conflict won't be easy and it won't be short. So he's urging Americans to be patient. He told anyone in uniform to get ready. And then, Judy, for the very first time, he used these 3 words.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly. And I appreciate very much the American people understanding that. As we plan, as we put our strategy into action, we will let you know when we think it's appropriate, not only for to protect the lives of our servicemen and women, but to make sure our coalition has had proper time to be noticed as well. But we're going to act.
And the president talking to reporters before a meeting which included Vice President Cheney as well as other members of his national security team. As you know, and we've been reporting, Vice President Cheney has been spending the past few days up at Camp David after the U.S. Secret Service decided it would be best, because of security concerns, not to have the vice president and the president in the same place. Now, Mr. Bush also doing something else for the very first time today. For the first time, he named suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden as a, quote, prime suspect. He also said that if bin Laden believed he could keep away from the U.S. and its allies, Mr. Bush saying bin Laden was, quote, sorely mistaken.
They will try to hide. They will try to avoid the United States and our allies. But we're not going to let them. They run to the hills. They find holes to get in. And we will do whatever it takes to smoke them out and get them running, and we'll get them.
And bin Laden believed to be hiding out in Afghanistan. Judy, one final other significant development. Neighboring Afghanistan, of course, is Pakistan. Secretary of State Colin Powell confirming today what CNN reported yesterday, that the Pakistanis have fully agreed to honor all requests from the U.S., which include the possibility of the U.S. using Pakistani airspace if the U.S. decides to wage any military attack. Judy?
All right, Kelly Wallace reporting from near Camp David. Bob Franken also joining us from the Pentagon, where there are two missions. One is to carry out any plans for war, as the president so bluntly put it today. Also to continue the recovery effort at the crash site. Bob?
Well, let's talk about the effort to carry out the plans first. And as we know, that's going to involve the use of reserve forces. Now, very quickly, the United States has about 1,300,000 reservists, about half of the total military force of the United States. Of that, just a small percentage has been authorized to be called up. 50,000 members of the reserves, that's the reserves of the various forces and the National Guard. About 35,000 of those will be called up. As you can see, the Army is going to supply 10,000, the Air Force 13,000, the Marines 7,500, the Navy 3,000, and the Coast Guard, which normally operates under the Department of Transportation, will provide 2,000. As you might suspect, looking at the fact that the Coast Guard is involved, these are going to be used for what the Pentagon calls homeland defense, supporting the effort in the United States in this remarkable time to offer military protection to the domestic front right here. Now, as you pointed out, Judy, at the same time that the reserve call-up is being envisioned in this building, the plans are still being made. At the very same time, the efforts are being made to reconstruct this building, which of course was the target of a catastrophic air collision that happened on Tuesday. And we're finding out that this is quite a remarkable building, larger, for instance, than 3 Empire State Buildings, badly damaged. You can see that we have close-up shots of where the plane hit, and right next to where the plane hit, you can see that it was just this tangled mess inside, as you might imagine, and you can see that a large effort is being made to shove away all the debris and build a huge number of wood shoring supports so there would not be a further collapse. They're making quite a bit of progress, according to the people inside, but what they're encountering, they say, is something that is just almost remarkable to see.
This is on the first floor. This is very close to where the airplane went into. You can see the evidence of some of the different shoring that they're using in order to shore up the building. The way they described it to me is they come in, they remove some debris, they shore it up, they move in further, they move some debris, they shore it up. And it reminded me of being like in a coal mine filled with metal shards all over the place.
Now, that was Terry Mitchell, who was describing the video that the Pentagon provided. It was shot yesterday. Terry Mitchell of the Department of Defense. Now, what is so remarkable about all this is the fact that this occurred in a just renovated section of the Pentagon where new, very, very blast-resistant glass was installed. Many of the windows stayed. They were not shattered at all, which probably was life-saving. And they went on to describe a situation where, at the point where the plane actually penetrated the building, on the floors up from there, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, people were able to get out. They were not injured. They were actually able to crawl out without injury. Remarkable renovation, which is being extended around the Pentagon. Now, of course, it's going to have to be expanded to repair what was already done. Judy?
And Bob, just to clarify, unlike New York, where they believe there may be pockets where people possibly, not likely, but possibly could be alive, and of course we all pray for that, at the Pentagon they don't see any pockets where a human being is likely to have survived.
They're not. They don't want to say so yet. They continue to insist they're not ready to give up, so they continue to look, but they will admit privately what they're really looking for are casualties. They have found several bodies today. They're not talking about the number yet, but of course we know that the latest estimate is for 189 casualties. That is to say, victims, people who were killed in this crash. You can look at what you're seeing here and just imagine that it might have been much worse. That's what they're saying here, but of course it was catastrophic, no matter how few were actually killed compared to what might have happened.
And just quickly, Bob, for the first few days, family members, loved ones of those missing were near the Pentagon trying to either get involved themselves
or observing. Are there any people like that around now?
Well, every once in a while you find somebody, particularly at the site that has been set up for media, about a mile away. They will be there sometimes. There is a hotel nearby where people can gather to get support and to get information. But for the most part, there is very little to do but wait and expect the worst.
All right. Bob Franken reporting.